It is clear from the Holy Quran and a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the coming of the Imam Mahdi will be at the end of the 13th century or the beginning of the 14th century. This is so clear, as you will see, that if one only ponders over this, they will not miss it. Where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself gives the time by saying al-ayat ba'da al-mi'atayn. This means the sign for the Mahdi will be after the 200 years. And notice the word the 200 years. What 200 years is being talked about here? This is the 200 years that follows the first millennium, the first 1,000 years. And this is the exact explanation given by Imam Abu Abdullah Nu'aym ibn Hamad, who was a teacher for Imam Bukhari, the famous hadith compiler known as Sahih Bukhari. He says that the word al-mi'atayn, the 200 years, point to a particular 200 years that comes after the first millennium, which is the first 1,000 years. And after that 1,000 years, the next 200 years, after the next 200 years, after the first 1,000 years, will be the time for the coming of the Mahdi. Hazrat Abu Qabil, rahimahullah, who was an authentic tabi'i, and his view is recorded in the book of Hazrat Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, radiyallahu rahimahullah. He also narrated from Sahaba like Hazrat Abdullah ibn Umar and Hazrat Amr bin al-Ath, and he passed away in 168 AH, and his famous statement is narrated as follows. It is narrated in the book Al-Qawl al-Mukhtasar fi Alamat al-Mahdi al-Muntazar, where he says, اجتماع الناس على المهدي سنة 400 أي بعد 1000 هكذا وردت في الأثر. The meaning of this statement is that it is the consensus of the people that the Imam al-Mahdi will appear in the 204 year, meaning after the 1,000 years. And that is what is mentioned in the narration. This is Al-Qawl al-Mukhtasar fi Alamat al-Mahdi al-Muntazar, page 59. In another narration, which is also reported in a hadith, reported by Hadrat Hudhayfa ibn Yaman, in the book An-Najm al-Thaqib, page 209. Hadrat Hudhayfa ibn Yaman reports that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إذا مدت 1240 سنة يبعث الله المهدي. That if 1,240 years pass, Allah will send the Mahdi. If 1,240 years pass, Allah will send the Mahdi. Now the question is, has that 1,240 years passed? Yes, that 1,240 years has passed. And if Allah has not sent the Mahdi, then what are the Muslims saying on the integrity of Hadrat Huzaifa ibn Yaman, on the integrity of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Now let me give a little piece from the Holy Quran plus a hadith which also corresponds with these dates and time that are being given to us by the scholars and the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. In the Quran, in chapter 32, verse 6, if you don't count Bismillah to be verse 5, Allah Almighty says, يُدَبِّرُ الْأَمْرَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ ثُمَّ يَعْرُجُ إِلَيْهِ فِي يَوْمٍ كَانَ مِقْدَارُهُ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ مِمَّا تَعُدُّونَ. Allah Almighty says that He is preparing the divine ordinance, which is the Quran, the divine law, which is the Quran, which will come and be with us for a particular period. After that period, ثُمَّ يَعْرُجُ إِلَيْهِ, it will ascend back to Him. And when it goes back to Him, it will be with Him for a day. فِي يَوْمٍ, but in our counting, in our reckoning, it is 1,000 years. كَانَ مِقْدَارُهُ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ مِمَّا تَعُدُّونَ. Now, the first period when the Quran or the ordinance will be with us, in other words, when the Muslims will be the practice of the Quran, the time was not given by the Quran. But the second period, when the Muslims will not be followers of the Quran, when they would have left the true teachings of Islam, that period, when the faith has ascended onto the place, that period is given by the Quran, which is 1,000 years. So Allah Almighty is giving us two periods. The second period being 1,000 years. So what is the first period? The first period, which is the better period, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Khairun nas qarni, or khairu quruni qarni." The best of the centuries is the century you find me. Thumma alladhina yalunahum, thumma alladhina yalunahum, and then the one that follows, and then the one that follows. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam giving us 300 years of a best time for the Muslims, and the Quran giving us 1,000 years of a bad time for the Muslims. 300 years and 1,000 years will come together, giving us 1,300 years, which also falls within the 13th century after Hijrah, or the beginning of the 14th century after Hijrah. It is not surprising that Imam Abdullah Abu Nu'aym ibn Hamad said that the Imam al-Mahdi will come after 1,200 years. It is not surprising that Hadrat Huzaifa ibn Yaman says that after 1,200 years, 1,240 years, we should start, Allah will send the Mahdi. It is not surprising that the Tabi'een and the Sahaba are agreed upon this, that Allah will send the Mahdi after 1,200 years, or after 1,240 years, or after 1,300 years. This clearly points to a very important fact, that in the 13th century, at the end of the 13th century, or the beginning of the 14th century, the claimant of Mahdi, which is Hadrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam, who was also supported by a divine sign of an eclipse of the moon and eclipse of the sun, which we shall talk about later, clearly is the Mahdi sent by Allah. Now remember, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is being compared to Nabi Musa alayhi salam. In the ummah of Musa alayhi salam, the Masih that was sent to Musa alayhi salam came after 1,300 years. In the likeness of it, in the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam came after Muhammad, 1,300 years after Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This clearly proves that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam is the Imam al-Mahdi wal Masih al-Maw'ud. Join us another time when we bring to you the signs that we expect about the Mahdi and the Masih. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuhu.